Good evening, and thank you to all the panel and participants in the audience and to our online viewers. Thank you for hearing my presentation today. My name is Angela Bischoff. I work with the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. We are a coalition of health and environmental organizations, faith communities, municipalities, utilities, unions, corporations, and individuals working for cleaner air through a coal phase-out and a shift to a renewable energy future. I organized an event last night at a club in downtown Toronto called Nuclear in the Spotlight. 100 people came out to learn what's happening now in Fukushima, to share our fears, and quite literally to celebrate the end of the nuclear age. We learned about how the industry and governments lied to us following the Chernobyl catastrophe, and how they're downplaying the risks associated with Fukushima. We learned about the contamination of the Pacific Ocean bordering Japan and how there is no safe dosage of radiation, meaning that supposedly diluting toxic radioactive elements in the ocean or in the atmosphere is of no consolation. And we learned that private investors worldwide are pulling their investments out of nuclear projects, and governments around the world are now questioning their continued massive subsidization of new nuclear projects. Meanwhile, here in Ontario, our government continues in its dogged commitment for 50% nuclear, which of course means that green technologies will be relegated to the sidelines, capped. There will be little place on the grid for renewables to grow. This would explain why there's been no public assessment of alternatives to the proposed Darlington new build project. Politics is trumping precaution and economics. Usually in environmental assessments, need and alternatives are included in the process, but not here. I find this unacceptable. With that, I'm going to proceed to speak to issues of cost and alternatives. I will assert that this project is not about providing Ontarians with cost-effective, clean electricity supply, but rather it's a desperate attempt to save Canada's nuclear industry. First, to project costs. In the 60s through the 90s, Ontario Hydro's profits from its water and fossil power generating stations subsidized the losses of its nuclear reactors. In fact, the cost of producing nuclear electricity was 7 times that of producing water power. In '99, as a result of the cost overruns and poor performance of its nuclear reactors, Ontario Hydro was broken up into 5 companies. All of its generation assets were transferred to OPG. However, in order to keep OPG solvent, $19.4 billion of Ontario Hydro's debt or unfunded liabilities associated with electricity generation facilities was transferred to Ontario Electricity Financial Corporation, an agency of the Government of Ontario, as stranded debt or unfunded liability. Since '99, Ontario consumers and taxpayers have paid almost $20 billion to service that debt of $19.4 billion, yet we still owe $15 billion. So this has not proven a good financial investment. OPG is now proposing to rebuild reactors at its Darlington nuclear station. According to OPG, the Darlington rebuild will have a capital cost of $8.5 to $14 billion. But every nuclear project in Ontario's history has gone over budget. On average, the real costs of Ontario's nuclear projects have been 2.5 times greater than the original cost estimates. Therefore, if history repeats itself, the real cost of the Darlington rebuild will be $21 to $35 billion, or 19 to 37 cents per kilowatt hour. Furthermore, and the reason of these hearings, of course, the cost of the proposed new build projects at Darlington came in at $26 billion for 2 reactors. Now we're looking at potentially 4. This gave the energy minister sticker shock, and the procurement process was postponed. The provincial government then passed the buck to the federal government, asking them for subsidies. In other words, Premier McGuinty is asking taxpayers in Vancouver and Halifax to subsidize new nuclear reactors in Ontario. To their credit, the Harper government hasn't budged on this request. Indeed, they've taken it a step further and put AECL up for sale, of which there are no bidders. The future of AECL is at stake with this new build project, and that's why I say politics is trumping precaution. So I'd like to look at alternatives now. Fortunately, there are numerous less costly, less risky, and more sustainable ways to meet our electricity needs. By reducing our demand for grid-supplied electricity, energy efficiency investments will make it easier for us to obtain 100% of our grid-supplied electricity from renewable sources. Since the summer of 2006, our peak demand for electricity has fallen by 7% and is forecast to fall by a further 6% in 2011. Nevertheless, our electricity consumption per person is 35% higher than New York State's, and therefore we still have a huge untapped energy efficiency potential, which we must aggressively pursue. At a cost of 2.3 to 4.6 cents per kilowatt hour, energy conservation and efficiency are a bargain. On the supply side, the lowest cost option to meet our electricity needs is to simply stop wasting natural gas. Virtually every home, building, and factory in Ontario uses natural gas to provide just one service, namely heat. It is much more efficient to use these same molecules of natural gas to simultaneously produce two services, heat and electricity. This is what combined heat and power plants do. Combined heat and power plants can have an overall energy efficiency of 80 to 90%, as compared to 33% for a nuclear reactor. And as a result of their very high efficiency, combined heat and power plants can meet our electricity needs at a cost of approximately 6 cents per kilowatt hour. That is less than a third the cost of a new or rebuilt nuclear reactor. In terms of renewable electricity, Ontario's lowest cost source of renewable electricity is water imports from the province of Quebec. Last year, Hydro-Quebec's exports to the U.S. exceeded the total output of our Pickering nuclear generating station. However, our inputs from Quebec were minuscule, and this just doesn't make sense. Now, there's two important facts to note with respect to Hydro-Quebec's electricity exports. First, in 2009, the average price of Quebec's export sales was 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Second, according to the National Energy Board Act, Ontario has the right to import electricity from Quebec at the same price that the Americans are now paying. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to invest tens of billions of dollars in nuclear power when we can import renewable electricity from Quebec at less than one-third the cost. I'd like to draw your attention to a report that I circulated previously to you all. It's called Powerful Options, a review of Ontario's options for replacing aging nuclear plants. And it is a report that our organization, the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, produced. It's from 2009. So what we came up with here is, so what we're discussing is that over the next 12 years, Ontario needs to replace 60 billion kilowatt hours of electricity produced by nuclear generators that will reach the end of their productive lives in the next decade. So we need to replace that electricity by 2021. So we analyzed how we could replace that 60 billion kilowatts of hour. And what we came up with is that by reducing or decreasing our electricity demand through conservation and efficiency efforts, we could eliminate the need to replace 47% of that nuclear power generation that will have reached the end of its service life by 2021. So we could achieve half of that generation just through conservation. Then we're proposing wind power integrated with Hydro-Quebec's water power. So that would produce baseload power. So wind power integrated with Hydro-Quebec's hydroelectric generation resources has the potential to provide Ontario with sufficient, firm, reliable, renewable electricity to replace 100% of the end-of-service life nuclear power generation by 2021. And finally, natural gas, combined heat and power plants. They could also provide 100% of our required replacement power by 2021. So there are many options, plentiful, and they're all much cheaper, as I stated earlier. Combined heat and power was 6 cents kilowatt hour. Water and wind combined was 9 to 13 cents a kilowatt hour. And new nuclear at this point stands at about 21 cents per kilowatt hour. So we have plenty of alternative ways to meet our electrical needs without building new nuclear plants. So to conclude, if approved, this nuclear new build project will lock Ontario into nuclear reliance for decades, denying us the swift and necessary transition to the renewable energy age that this era of climate change and declining resources demands. The proposed project should not proceed without a full public review and assessment of all project costs against other energy options. And for all these reasons, I request that OPG's proposal to build additional reactors at the Darlington site be rejected. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bischoff.